we're going to move on to some overall draft strategy, and let me leave this one off because I've seen this happen more than once in leagues with guys who've been involved in fantasy football for quite a number of years. They just don't know the scoring system in their league. So before you start your draft, just get on the internet, pull down your league's scoring system, and find out, number one, how many points passing touchdowns are worth. Because you may think you're drafting Aaron Rodgers or Andrew Luck, whoever it is in the first round, and you're getting the best quarterback, which is fine. But if passing touchdowns are worth 4 points, you're going to come into your week one, Aaron Rodgers throws 3 touchdowns, and he's going to have a lot less points than you think he should. So that's one thing. Another thing is to make sure you have, if it's a PPR league or not. If it's a standard league, wide receivers are going to be probably a little bit downgraded. Not a ton. The elite guys are still going to be guys going off the board in the first round, like Antonio Brown and guys of that nature. But in PPR leagues, you may value a guy like Julian Edelman much higher than you would if it were a standard scoring league. So it really amazes me sometimes how people just let the most basic things in fantasy football slip, and knowing how many points a touchdown is worth, whether a reception is worth a point, it matters. That's a big deal because it could come down to that at the end of the season when you're trying to make a playoff spot. So, Des, I'll toss it to you. What is your draft strategy?
It's something I like to do in a lot of drafts is wait on QB. I think all these strategies are dependent on how the draft unfolds. Yeah. And obviously, if Andrew Luck slips to the late third round or really falls, fine, take him. I just think that you get your best value when you wait on quarterbacks because there's a ton of them. I mean, the 14th ranked quarterback is Philip Rivers, who's pretty good. Yeah. And the beauty of waiting on quarterback is that when you get down to like the 8th, 9th, 10th rounds, a lot of the other players you're looking at other positions are kind of like scrubs. I mean, you don't know if they're going to play or not. You don't know what you're going to get from them. Or you could draft Tony Romo. Right? I think you have a pretty good idea what you're going to get from him. You have a lot of safety and security in quarterback picks later down the draft where other guys are pretty darn sketchy.
One of the things I love about drafts is when an owner has not taken a quarterback and they're in the 10th round and they're trying to dig through and see who it is. You can get a lot of laughs out of that because sometimes you're really scraping the bottom of the barrel. But
you can, but it's so deep. I mean, you could draft Carson Palmer as your QB1. I mean, the only problem with him is he might get injured. But okay, if he doesn't, he's great. Yeah. Andy Dalton could come through for you.
Mike, let's move on to you. What is your draft strategy?
My personal approach to the draft is safety first. It's a good principle for life as well. In this case, what I'm aiming for consistent picks at the top of the draft. We discussed taking Eddie Lacy number 1. Marshawn Lynch is another guy I would sort of say exemplifies this. You know exactly what you're going to get if you take him in the first round. Use some of those other picks to fill in the gaps with known quantities, and then take your gambles late. Yeah. If you can take your flyers in the 10th round, 11th round, and those are your real lottery tickets, if they don't pan out, you drop them, you don't get burned. If your number 1 or number 2 or number 3 pick doesn't pan out, now you're in trouble. Yeah. But if you can land some hot commodities early, Marshawn Lynch, Calvin Johnson, first, second round, take a good top quarterback, Andrew Luck, Aaron Rodgers variety, if the scoring system's right, then you're doing good business, and you can dance if you want to.
I will ask about the safety first. For a player like Dez Bryant, who has had off-the-field issues, is that a worry? I mean, would you look at Dez Bryant early, or given his off-the-field history?
End of round 1, start of round 2 for sure. The only concern is if he gets nicked again for some sort of disciplinary issue, his suspension might be a little bit longer than most.
Neil, give us your overall strategy.
I really like the zero running back strategy, especially if you're drafting.
Which you've used yourself.
Which I've used myself, especially if you're drafting late in the first round. So if you're in a 12-team league, if you're drafting past the 8th pick, I think it's a great strategy. And if you look at what I call the bust potential, right? Yeah. I mean, the chances of a running back busting in one of your top picks is much higher than one of the wide receivers. And if you're looking at the 7th, 8th, or 9th spot, all the top running backs that we spoke about are going to be gone. So you're much better off taking Antonio Brown, Dez Bryant, Demaryius Thomas with that pick, maybe even with your first 2 picks in the turn on the second round, because you're starting with 2 elite wide receivers instead of a middling running back and possibly a second-tier wide receiver. So I think it's, Dez alluded to it before, you want someone that's going to be productive. You want someone that you can be sure of. And I think that later on in the draft, it's much easier to find that in the wide receiver position, perhaps Gronkowski at tight end, than it is to start to take, reaching for these other type of running backs.
Well, sir, if it's all about winning your matchup, right? That's a lot of what I do when I look at my draft board. If I can win pretty much this matchup each week, I'm taking that guy. And if you got Antonio Brown and Calvin Johnson, you're probably going to win the wide receiver matchup week to week, right? So not a bad strategy.
And maybe even some running back matchups as well.
Yeah, right.
And it's important to remember that You know, zero RB it's just a strategy that you employ as the draft unfolds if it makes sense to do it.
Right.
You know, if there's great running backs sitting there, go ahead and take them. You know, but it's a way to sort of calm your mind and say, I can start with a bunch of wide receivers early because I'm going to take shots at running back later and it'll probably work out.